Now I'm just sitting here and thinking of all the stuff I should have said and I didn't. I mean, I didn't even get to tell you that I love you too. I love you. What am I doing? I love you. God, I've got to see you. I've got to get off this plane.
Oh my God.
Excuse me.
Miss, please sit down.
No, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry, but I need to get off the plane, okay? I need to just tell someone that I love them.
Miss, I can't let you off the plane.
Let her off the plane!
Oh, come on, miss. Isn't there any way that you can just let me off the...
No! Oh my God. Did she get off the plane? Did she get off the plane?
I got off the plane.
I just wanted to let you know about my study group.
Oh, don't be a fuddy-duddy. I'll be your study buddy.
I'm about to embark on one of the great challenges of my scientific career.
This work right here is going to change history.
I think this is going to be our greatest mission.
I don't have time to study. I'll never get into Stanford.
I got big plans for you tonight. I got maps, I got charts. I'm going to see you through this because my credibility is on the line.
It's at this point that you'll want to start taking notes.
Welcome to the Sitcom Study, the podcast where we contemplate the TV shows we grew up with and search for the truth and wisdom within the tropes and cliches. And Amy, what, may I ask, are we talking about today?
Well, it's our nearly happily ever after for our will they won't they couples.
Yeah. This is episode 50 of our Sitcom Study podcast. If you haven't been with us the whole time, we decided back at episode 10 that we would make every 10th episode of our podcast an ongoing study of the great will they won't they relationships of sitcom history. Sam and Diane from Cheers, Ross and Rachel from Friends, Jem and Pam from The Office, Jess and Nick from New Girl. And we've been endeavoring every 10 episodes to sort of craft this narrative where we tried to line up the story beats. And we found the episodes that fit with the meet cute act, the tension rising act, the point of no return act, and then last time was the breakups, right? So last time I made the comparison to The Empire Strikes Back, Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. Last time was a real bummer of a watch, because we had all of our various sitcom lovers, we basically gave ourselves a lineup where we watched them all be miserable, usually in 2-part episodes.
It was a lot of sadness.
And right. So now here we are at episode 50, Act 5 of our Will They, Won't They romance case study. Things are getting messy, right? In order to sort of tie up these relationships, forget about the 2-parters. In some cases, we watched like half a dozen episodes to just try to make sure we understood, how these stories turn out, right? With these lovers.
So you have these wonderful shows that ran for, I think in one case, 11 years, in one case, 10 years, and then 7 years for New Girl and The Office. These stories all kind of wrap up around season 5, right? Around season 5, there's a definitive end to most of these stories in that something happens that then there is no major change in the status of the will they, won't they for the remainder of the series.
Right. Well, what we'll find is the lateral trope of all of these is you start introducing other will they, won't they's, right? In each of these cases, we're talking about the sort of OG lovers of each particular show. And in at least 3 out of our 4 cases, by the time these romances are really in full swing, we're starting to bring up the rookies from the summer leagues. We're starting to introduce...
We're interested in Monica and Chandler and Cece and Schmidt and all these other characters, right?
Michael and Amy Ryan. Yeah. And so there's this sort of tapestry of other things going on. So yeah, that's one thing. But also the real messiness to me is that, because these are ongoing serialized shows. We're not in Britain where they just make 3 episodes per season, right? We got to crank these out. And so you see, I feel like we did a good job in those first 4 acts of finding, the quintessential episode where whatever, Sam and Diane get on each other's nerves or something. With this, it's really like, oh boy, okay, so, we left them broken up, and now the sort of ongoing turmoil that's going to eventually culminate in them getting back together is so stretched out, and there's so many steps along the way, and other interloping lovers and marriages in some cases that it really, I guess what I'm saying is I'm sort of putting the disclaimer out ahead of it that, we're going to do our best to sort of distill these down into a few episodes to focus on. But really, these are kind of crazy, complicated stories that don't lend themselves to being boiled down to 1 or 2 episodes.
Sure. I mean, Sam and Diane make it easy because Diane leaves Cheers at the end of season 5, right? So what you kind of see, and that was, we've said it before, but James Burrows, one of the creators and oftentimes director of Cheers and Friends, has said that the reason Cheers was such a long-lasting show was because Diane left. Because Shelley Long decided to pursue a movie career instead of staying with television and staying on the sitcom. And so that storyline that they were kind of running out of juice on anyway, by the time they got to the end of season 5, they could reinvent the show in a new way, bring on a new character, have something totally different go on with the people in the bar from then on. With a show like Friends, that didn't happen.
Yeah.
And so they did a New Girl, same thing. Kind of midway through, we see the writers start to focus on different couples and kind of just move away from the exhausting will they, won't they of the same people over and over again. And then we also get complications brought in. So there is a little, particularly for Nick and Jess and Ross and Rachel, there's like little dribs and drabs throughout that go for across the many seasons in between the initial breakup and then the final, nearly happily ever after for most of our couples.
Yeah, well, you also see the way that sitcoms change as you trace it from Sam and Diane to the other ones. You see how they get more complicated. It's something that really was noticeable to me, that Cheers is, if nothing else, an ensemble comedy, of course, like nobody's going to deny that. And yet you see how in the 80s, in the world of Cheers compared to the later ones, it's just simpler and the stories are more straightforward and bare bones. We talk about how with the really old sitcoms, like the Andy Griffiths, how it's like a play, act 1, Andy in his living room, act 2, Andy in his backyard, and everything is so kind of like deliberate and simple and straightforward. And of course, that's changed a little bit in the years since, but with Cheers, you still really get the crux of the show is Sam and Diane. They're the heart of it. They're the real relationship. Everybody else is coloring, and we're going to bring them in once in a while and even maybe give them a legit, story, maybe a romance of their own, but we're never going to mistake Carla for being the lead on Cheers. It's a very straightforward, we know what our priorities are and everything. There's a very clear org chart, in the Cheers world. And when you get to Friends and definitely The Office and New Girl, where they're giving the audience credit to be able to handle a lot more spinning plates and have a lot more stories going on that you really can be invested in, and to let the focus shift over time so that, Monica and Chandler can take over being the heart of the show for a while. And I feel like they wouldn't have tried that with Cheers.
Right.
So, okay, lots to talk about. I will leave it to your judgment to sort of narrow down some of the shows that we watched. What is our lineup?
All right, so we are watching Cheers Season 5, Episode 26, Adieu. Friends, Season 10, Episode 17, The Last One. The Office, Season 5, Episodes 1 and 2, Weight Loss. And New Girl, Season 6, Episode 22, 5 stars for Beezus.
So you talked about how, this crazy will they, won't they drama has been going on for years and years with Cheers. And that is very much remarked upon in the beginning of this episode. This starts with Sam I get he's engaged to Diane at the beginning of this Adieu. And we can fill in some of the backstory leading up to this, but it is just funny, Carla's doing her whole thing. Oh, I can't even stand the mention of her name. What in the world do you see in her? And, someone makes a comment about how, this has been going on for 5 years now. And it does just, you look at it and go like, Jesus, how did people put up with this? It was just... That was the thing in those days. You tuned in every week to see the latest hijinks. But if you think about it as a real life thing, it would be like, Jesus, these people would be, like they would have killed each other by now.
Well, which is why everyone's at the bars kind of annoyed with them at this point, right? I think, obviously there's been a lot going on. The last time we watched Sam and Diane, they were saying goodbye. They were breaking up. And Diane said she's leaving and she is never coming back. And she does. And at the beginning of season 4, we find out that she had checked herself into a mental institution and she needed a respite. And Sam has spent the last 3 months on a bender. Yeah. So they took the summer between season 3 and season 4 and kind of imagined it as time actually passing and talked about it as though she spent 3 months in a mental institution and he spent 3 months on this bender. Coach is the one who does all the machinations trying to get them back together. But at this point, Diane has met and fallen in love with Dr. Fraser Crane. Yeah. So this is all of season 3. We've got the Fraser conundrum, right? He's much more on Diane's level intellectually. They're much more well suited to one another. But this whole time, he's introduced into the bar as a way of helping Sam come to terms with his alcoholism and get sober again. Yes. And then once Sam sobers up, then they tell him, oh, by the way, we're dating.
Wildly inappropriate, right? This could not possibly happen. Fraser is the worst psychiatrist ever. He is treating Sam for his alcoholism. Like all of Sam's friends have basically had an intervention with him. I feel like this is before that became such a widely known thing. But they've all said you need to get a handle on your drinking.
While drinking at the bar.
Yeah. So he goes to Fraser, sort of swallows his pride and submits himself to this therapy. And we see scenes of him in therapy with Fraser. This takes place over however many weeks of him, getting past his alcoholism and opening up to Fraser and everything. And all the while, Fraser is not telling him, I am your ex-girlfriend's lover. Right. It is wild. And that's never even really addressed by the show. It's maybe we should have told you. But I feel like the show never confronts, no psychiatrist would do this. This would be an insane conflict of interest.
Well, and so Sam quits therapy once he feels like he's done with his alcoholism. And that's when Fraser and Diane tell him. So that's all kind of beginning of season 3. And then throughout season 3 and 4, we have this love triangle going on, right? So by the end of season 3, Diane and Fraser are going to Italy. They're taking a trip to Italy where Fraser is planning to propose, and we get another goodbye, right? So the end of season 3, the episode is Cheerio Cheers or something like that. Just like at the end of season 2, it's I'll be seeing you. And this one's
Adieu. Have a nice life. Goodbye forever.
They're always saying goodbye, right? They're always saying goodbye. Sam and Diane, they say goodbye to each other alone in the bar at Cheers and then start making out. And then, heavy indications are that they go run back to Sam's house and have a fling before she goes to Italy. Well, so then he decides he is going to go to Italy and stop the wedding because Diane's calling him and saying, oh, we got engaged, oh, this, oh, that. And then they decide to get married immediately while they're over there. And so Sam's like, that's it. I'm going to go stop the wedding. Right.
Just like Rachel.
That's right. Just like Rachel. So Sam gets there, and this is the season finale in season 3. Sam gets there and he's too late. He can't stop the wedding. It's over. Right. We find out at the beginning of season 4 that the wedding actually never happened. Sam's back in the bar. Fraser comes back to the bar and tells everyone he was jilted. He was left at the altar, and then reveals that Diane, in self, penitence or whatever, has joined a convent on the outskirts of Boston and is is in a convent because she's so upset with herself after having affairs and running off with Sam. And then after she leaves Frasier, she kind of, sleeps her way through Europe for a while. So she's just like, oh, I'm so bad. I have to go put myself in this convent. So Sam goes and rescues her from the convent. And that's kind of like where we are in season 4. And then throughout season 4, Sam proposes 4 times and she keeps saying no, no, no. And they have this argument every time. And she's like, I don't want, he ends up dating this other woman who's a lot like Diane, but on like politically opposite side of the spectrum. So they don't get along. And so Sam proposes and she's like, no, it's just a rebound. And then he proposes again and over and over and over. There's doing all of this proposing. She finally says yes. And that's where we find them here towards the end of season 5. She's finally accepted his proposal and they're going to get married. And in the episode right before this one, they bought a house together.
Yeah, that's a lot. You see the behind the scenes machinations working here. The fact that Frasier is still here, right? Like their relationship ended.
Yeah,
but
he was meant to only be on 3 episodes.
Right.
And somehow get written off after the therapy thing was done. And then she would just break up with him. But he was so good and he was so liked by the audience that he just stayed on. And so then this love triangle, they had to keep feeding into.
Yeah, well, and it's funny how every time we see these two, she has someone like this, right? It starts out with Sumner Sloan in the first episode. We're going to re-meet him, but he was her professor fiance at the first one. Then you got Christopher Lloyd, the pretentious artist that was, everything that Sam wasn't. And now Frasier, the show is always giving her these romantic rivals, these people to be everything that Sam isn't, some hoity-toity stuffy person. But with Frasier, and it's funny because I feel like with Christopher Lloyd, he was too big for that. Like maybe not in his fame at the time, but he's just like, Christopher Lloyd isn't going to stick around to be on Cheers. Like,
well, he had already done Taxi with the same people. So
yeah, and he's destined in a few years to do Back to the Future and just be totally off to the races.
Next year, yeah.
Yeah. Whereas Frasier, for whatever reason, the stars aligned and everyone was like, we love this guy. Like, it's just so funny that he started out as like just another tool to be like, oh, he's some like uptight professor guy. We don't like him. But, he was the last man standing. He's still on TV playing this character now, like 30 years later.
Yes,
it's kind of wild. So yeah, he's just like one of the gang basically at this point. So yeah, we're going to get, like I said, the return of Sumner Sloan, her original fiance.
Right.
And that's going to be the sort of catalyst for this conflict here. Like you said, they're engaged to be married, right?
Yep.
And so Sumner shows up. This is going to be a recurring subtrope. The world of publishing would like to court you away from your lover. It's funny how that is specifically like the siren song that a lot of these characters can't resist. Sumner Sloan took the liberty of sending one of Diane's manuscripts because before she, settled down in this bartender role, she was a writer and she wrote these novels and he submitted one and there's a publishing house that's interested in publishing it. This all seems very sketchy and transparent, right? This dude shows up the day before you're getting married and says like, oh, guess what? Pendant Publishing might be interested in one of your manuscripts.
And by the way, it's very obvious that you can't write as long as you're with that swine. So you can use my house in Maine for the next 6 months, but you have to make a choice, marriage or career. You can't possibly have both. And this is the actual conversation they have over a pool table that, oops, surprise, surprise, Sam is underneath, but they don't know because he was fixing one of the pockets or something.
Yeah. This dichotomy drives me crazy. Yes. We're going to see this again a little bit in Friends, and then they finally start to get rid of it in the later shows. But this notion that you can't not even that you can't like have a family, that you can't have a relationship, that you can't be married and have any sort of artistic or professional aspirations. It's ludicrous, especially when she already wrote the book.
Well, she's got an unfinished manuscript.
I know, she's got to do another pass on it, but it's not like she's even starting from scratch. It is wild. And the scenario that he paints, because she rejects this dichotomy at first. She says what exactly she should say. Why can't I be married and be a writer? And he goes like, so what, you're telling me you're going to be writing a novel at the same time as you're changing diapers of your many kids? And I'm just like, dude, those are not the same thing. You don't get issued children as soon as you get married. That is a separate thing.
You did in the 80s, Jay.
Yeah, some people don't ever have kids, even after they get married. And even if they do, you can still do other things. It is so funny to me that they set up that false dichotomy. They never consider the possibility that having a relationship with another adult, especially one who is the owner of a successful business, might actually be an asset to your professional or creative aspirations. It might actually help you accomplish things. No, it's always got to be this stark choice that by getting married, you are giving up any hope of ever doing anything ever.
Right.
It's so stupid.
Well, and I think what they try to say, what they try to kind of move away from is your kids and your responsibilities as a wife are going to keep you from it. But it's more that, she has lowered herself to Sam's level. And she argues with Sumner about this. She was like, he didn't drag me down to his level. I walked arm in arm with him down to his level. And then she realizes what he's really saying, which is, she's not having the enriched intellectual conversations and life that she was leading before she started working at this bar and dating this man, or having this, on and off again kind of thing with this man. And so she needs to surround herself with a different type of people if she wants to get back to that person who was able to do that writing in the first place.
Yeah. Again, dead wrong. Is it better for you as a writer to be surrounded with working people from all walks of life sharing their experiences, or hang out with a bunch of fussy professors all the time? Like, it's so stupid. And yeah, it just shows you like the 80s was obsessed with this snobs versus slobs mentality. Like, you see in every movie and TV show this thing, like, we just loved our, lovable working man types. What Ted Danson represents in this show and what Sumner represents is, it's again this false dichotomy. Like, if you've been to college, get out of here. You're stuck up. You're pretentious. We don't want you. We want to be with, the Sam Malones of the world. We want to have fun. Yeah. We want to be with the characters that are played by Bill Murray and Tom Hanks and just always be these sort of goofy, funny guys. And so, yeah, it is bizarre that like within the show, Sumner is embracing this weird false dichotomy. And then the show itself is embracing this other weird false dichotomy that like it's almost the opposite. Like, you have to be uneducated and like have an hourly wage job in order to like really have the marrow of life.
Right. In order to hang.
Yeah. It's just so funny.
No, and that's really interesting that you said that, like, about how you're right. I mean, Pretty in Pink, right? Like, anything John Hughes did, that's what that is. It's like the outcasts versus the preps. But when I think about that, isn't that so much of what our culture war is now?
Yeah, but I guess the difference is the Sam Malones of the world. I feel like maybe like different demographics would like align themselves differently with the different factions.
But I wonder if that's just us. Like, did we start aligning ourselves more in like the snob category? Rather than like I definitely used to see myself as the outsider, Yeah. So like, what happened? Is it our fault? Did we do this?
No, yeah, it is different. And I do think it has something to do with like the increased liberalism that we associate with academia now. That wasn't so much a thing back then. I feel like you associated like social conservatism maybe with
true.
academes back in that time. So yeah, again, connotations have changed a little bit, but definitely you still have this same stuff going on. But yeah, it's the point is now we've got not one, not two, but three former / current jilted or unjilted lovers or
right.
people who have at one time been engaged to Diane. So tangled web.
Exactly. And so what you're kind of seeing is Carla representing all of the working men saying to Sam, you know, you're not going to be able to make it work with this woman. I can't believe you're even considering it. You guys are so different. And then you have all these people in Diane's life who pop in and out, right? They're not people who are consistently in her life. But every time one of these elite kind of, you know, intellectual snobby people gets introduced into her world, they just make her see, they shine a big old bright light on the fact that these two aren't right together. And every single time they come back together, because they just can't get enough of each other. The sexual tension is too much and they're just so attracted to each other and they want it. And Sam has this beautiful fantasy of them. Like, so we get everybody in old age makeup in this, right? We get them, you know, 50 years in the future. They've had kids. Now they have grandkids and they've lived this long, happy life together. And Sam says to Diane, don't you regret, you know, giving up your career? And she says, absolutely not. Like, this is what I always wanted. I always wanted to be married. I always wanted to have a family. Like, I would not change a thing. And that's what convinces Sam that even though he overheard this conversation and he believes Sumner, like the one who Sumner convinces isn't Diane in that moment. It's Sam underneath the coffee table. And so Sam tries to break it off, tries to postpone the wedding, is like, look, I think you need to maybe do the thing and focus on your writing, and that's okay. And we'll see where we are once you finish this manuscript. But you can't not take this opportunity. And she's like, no, that's ridiculous. Like, it'll be fine. I want to get married. You're what I want. And so then he has this little fantasy and he says, okay, well then if that's what you want, then we'll do it.
Because she wants to get married immediately.
Yeah, she's like, I don't want to wait. This is ridiculous. I don't like that people are trying to change our minds. We just need to do it.
Right, which I find a little surprising. You know, she basically wants to elope, which just seems odd. Like, look, I don't know that much about Diane in this regard, but I would just, like, don't they have families? Like, doesn't she, you know, if she comes from high society, it just seems strange to me that she would gravitate towards like, oh yeah, let's just get married like really fast and not worry.
Well, I don't
about
think that's what they were originally planning, but it was like when Sam started seemingly having cold feet, she's like, this is ridiculous. Are you trying to back out? I don't want to do this. Like, let's just get married. It doesn't matter. We need to end this will they, won't they nonsense. Like, let's just do the thing. Let's just get married. It'll be fine. Yeah. Which is kind of like, let's get married to save our relationship.
Well, that's the thing. And that's what Sam calls her out on. He's like, it sounds like you're just doing this. You want to get married real fast so you don't change your mind, you know? But yeah, this suggestion to immediately get married is what sparks that fantasy. You know, it's just like the Saved by the Bell pink borders, but without the pink border. It's very much like, oh, I need to contemplate this thing. Let me have a fantasy where I project into the future and it'll, you know, everybody wins. The audience gets this fun little thing with weird costumes and I get to contemplate this life decision. I thought it was hilarious that like 50 years in the future, they're still using rotary phones in Sam's little world. But it's also funny how the show with this old age makeup predicts what Ted Danson will look like in the future, and they are very wrong. They don't predict his like super white hair that he has.
No,
now.
he has salt and pepper gray.
Yeah, they do this kind of off-putting thing. He looks like, you know, Ted Danson was in the movie Creepshow, and he gets drowned. He gets buried in sand so that he'll be drowned at high tide. And then he comes back as like a water zombie with his face all messed up. And this is kind of what old Sam Malone looks like in this fantasy. I'm happy to say real life 60-something Ted Danson looks much better than this fantasy version.
Absolutely. I mean, well, real life Ted Danson isn't a working man, so that's probably why.
No, that's true. Yeah, if anything, he's gotten better looking with age.
With age, I know. When he let his hair go white, I was like, okay, all right, I like this. Also, we get a nice scene in the bar. They decide, okay, we're going to do this quickie wedding. We're going to get a justice of the peace. We're going to do it at the bar because why wouldn't we do it surrounded by all of our friends?
Well, overlapping trope. This is definitely a thing that we will cover at some point. The sitcom thing of let's have the wedding in the same place where we always hang out.
That's right.
Let's have the wedding in the tanner's backyard or in the courtroom or whatever it is.
We don't need to come up with a new set.
Yeah,
we
exactly.
can just do it on what we have, and won't it be homey and cute and make everybody happy?
Yeah. And so, yeah, that's exactly what they do. And the sort of running joke is that everybody is taking bets on whether or not they'll go through with it. So there's always money changing hands, with every little twist and turn of this wedding ceremony.
Right. So Fraser has bet that Diane's going to run out and the wedding isn't going to happen. And a bunch of other people have bet that Sam's going to run out. So yeah, money keeps changing hands. Fun thing to know about the actual filming of this episode. So at this point, the production team, everybody knew that Diane wasn't coming back. She had not signed a contract for the next season, and Ted Danson already had. So it was not yet known in the world at large that she wasn't coming back, because obviously contracts can still be negotiated, throughout the summer. But they were anticipating this as a finished thing, but they shot a fake ending for the live audience. And the real ending, the real wedding that we saw on television was not shot in front of a live studio audience. It was secret. So the ending that they shot in front of the live studio audience for the wedding was they get into a little argument like we saw in the actual ending that aired. And then Sam and Diane are having this conversation and they're like, but I do want to marry you. And Diane's like, I do too. And the justice of the peace goes, I now pronounce you husband and wife, because they've been going back and forth so much. And Diane goes, yay. And Sam goes, oh, and then kisses her, and the whole audience cheers and money changes hands, with the people and the patrons in the bar. And that's the end of that episode. That's it.
That is funny. I didn't know they were doing that kind of stuff back then. That's what they had to do with the Phantom Menace, and now I think it's become really common with all those Marvel and Star Wars movies.
Yeah, they did it on purpose. They wanted it to leak that Sam and Diane end up married. Sam and Diane get married in the last episode. They wanted the studio audience to say something, and so that's why they shot that in front of them. What actually happens is Diane gets a phone call in the ceremony, right? Woody answers the phone and is like, oh, hey, all right, I'll take a message. Diane, just so you know, the publishing company called. They're going to publish your manuscript or whatever. And this whole issue resurfaces as they're getting married, like as they're taking their vows. Sam starts going like, this isn't a good idea. I'm just going to hold you back or whatever, right? And they kind of go through this whole thing again. They do more will they, won't they? Yeah, exactly. And Diane reassures him and is like, I want to say my vows. And so he says, okay. And so she says her vows. And then as the justice of the peace is about to say, I pronounce you husband and wife, Sam's like, hold on, I want to take mine back. I need a do-over. And then, of course, the money changes hands in the bar again. And Diane's like, why are you trying to get out of this wedding? And so they have this whole conversation and they say, okay, I guess we're going to postpone. We're not going to get married today. We're going to postpone the wedding. And so that's the end of that scene. And then we get another scene where they're saying goodbye again. It's the bar is closed, end of the night. And she's leaving for her 6 months in Maine to go finish her manuscript and work with this editor and do the thing. And so, they're saying goodbye and she's like, I'll see you in 6 months. And as she's going up the stairs, he says, have a nice life. And she's like, no, Sam, that isn't what this is. Like, I'm coming back and, and we'll see where we are and it's going to be okay. And I'll see you in 6 months. And she leaves. And then he says to the door as she's walking up the stairs, have a nice life again, which is just like, oh. Yeah. Now talk about a recurring subtrope. Again, 3 out of 4 of our episodes are going to have the woman specifically say, I need to leave town for a finite amount of time for my work, for some sort of professional aspiration. And it is funny how this is the 1.0 version where, it's like, that represents, like we said before, this binary choice.
And in this case, Diane is the one who's more optimistic and Sam is more jaded. But yeah, I mean, look, we went through all this just 10 minutes ago. We don't need to do the whole thing again, but it does just seem like such a false choice. You know, just why can't Sam go? You know, hey, you guys watch the bar. I'll be back in a week. And then maybe you take some time. Just like on a practical level, it's not that hard to overcome this. But also, I guess on a larger relationship level, and this comes up again in Friends, this idea that like, if they're out of your sight for more than a few weeks, stuff is going to happen. Right. You know, life will take them away.
Well, and that's, I mean, I don't think Sam and Diane have enough trust or enough, you know, self-control to not end up dating somebody within, you know, a few months of being apart, or just not really do the thing and go and, you know, for Diane, if she's thinking about Sam and wanting to, like, calling Sam every night and wanting to be back with Sam, then she's not, you know, really going to be focusing on writing the book, right? So they have to have this, we're going to be done and we'll see where we are in 6 months. But Sam knows that she's going to have this amazing career. And that's why he's saying, have a good life.
Yeah, I guess the idea is that once you go and start working for this publisher, it's not going to be the occasional smart professorial academe that comes in to shake things up. Your whole life is going to be these guys.
And that's who you want to be with anyway. Like, that's where you're most comfortable.
But that's the debatable part, is that I guess I would hope that after these 5 years, he would have the confidence to be like, hey, look, you know, the proof is in the pudding. You're still here. She says she wants to marry me. Maybe she likes me more than her stuffy, you know, academic friends. But that's, none of that is like, none of that happens. It's all, you need to be in my sight or else I've lost you forever.
Right. And 6 months is an like insurmountable amount of time in the Sam and Diane world. Now, fast forward 5 years into the future, we're at the end of Cheers, the series finale, and Diane comes back as a special guest star. And what we find out is that the reason she didn't come back after 6 months was that she wasn't a roaring success. And she kept feeling like she couldn't come back until she was successful, because Sam had made it seem like that when he was like, have a good life, you know, like she was going to go and be so amazing and he was never going to get to see her again because she was going to be so amazing. But it didn't work out that way. Like the novel didn't really end up getting published. It ended up getting optioned and it became this TV movie, but it took all these years for that to happen. So now she's written, you know, she wrote the screenplay for this kind of TV movie that's become quite popular. So she feels like she can come back because she finally got the success that she gave him up for. And he gave her up so that she could have. And so they get engaged again, and they're on the plane, and they're going to fly off to LA, which is where she lives, and be married because Cheers is ending and the bar is getting sold and whatever is happening anyway. And then all these weird announcer things keep coming on in the plane that's like, do you really want to do this? And think twice before taking a big leap and that kind of stuff. And they realize, yeah, we were never meant to be together. We're doing it again, aren't we? And so then they finally break up, for the very, very last time.
That's funny. So it's basically, you know, if she hasn't been on for those last 5 years, it's like a little flare up, right. Essentially.
It's just a footnote to give everybody who loved Sam and Diane in the very last series finale episode, which you see it in Friends. Like we watched the very last episode of Friends for this episode of the podcast, and it's like so many callbacks, you know, Phoebe using phalange, like all of these things, the chicken, the duck, New Girl does the same thing. Like they all are taking their victory lap on those final episodes. So that's what they did with Cheers too.
Yeah, and of course it would make sense to bring her back if you can. But it's funny how, again, you see TV just being a little bit different back then in terms of that and these other ones that we're mostly talking about, where even though this relationship is serialized and ongoing, it's much less so than in the later shows. Like, it still is kind of episodic, and they still do need to cram a lot into these either single episodes or 1 or 2 episode arcs where, yeah, talking about this, just the wild swings of them going from being engaged at the start of the episode to then like maybe calling it off to then, basically eloping to them calling it off again that night, and same thing now, how you're describing the final episode. Like, if this were modern television, even in a half-hour sitcom, these would be half-season arcs, that would happen. Where
we would spread it out,
Yeah, and we would really dig into these things, and whatever the tone of the show was would determine how they handled it, but it would be more developed, and it wouldn't be this thing where, between 9:32 and 9:38 p.m., you're going to see like the whole direction of these characters' lives change.
Right. We go from engaged to saying goodbye within 22 minutes.
The only other thing I'll say about Cheers is I feel like this season 5 finale that we watched where she leaves, Avengers Endgame stole this ending. She walks out the door and Sam has this melancholy return to his fantasy. He goes back into his old age fantasy. It's this beautiful little moment where it's just the two of them dancing. It's old Sam and old Diane dancing quietly, like old person dancing in their living room, which is exactly the end of Avengers Endgame. What's his name? Captain America goes back in time, finds his old, World War II lover, and it ends with them like swaying to the old Perry Como music or something. Spoiler alert, but I feel like I'm on to you, Kevin Feige. I see where you got that.
I see where you got that. See, that's interesting. I was thinking of it more like the end of Inception, where he goes off to the island and we don't know whether, it's like, oh, is that his real happy ending?
Right.
Or is this like his imagined happy ending? Like, to me, this was like Sam's imagined happy ending, but also we don't know if that still is going to happen. As the audience, we know now that it isn't, but...
Yeah, I think all the blockbusters of the 2010s were cribbing off of the season 5 finale of Cheers. All right, moving on to Friends.
Here we go. We are watching season 10, episode 17, The Last One, among others.
Yeah.
So Ross and Rachel officially break up. That's where we left them. Now, in the intervening time, they've dated many, many people, obviously. Ross gets married again. So Rachel introduces, after they've kind of had their post-breakup, things are hard, Rachel introduces Ross to her boss's niece, Emily, and asks him to kind of show her around town because she has a date with this guy, Joshua.
Now, let's just pause on Emily for a second. I had a full-on Mandela effect situation here. I would have bet any amount of money that David Schwimmer's character was engaged to a character played by Emily Mortimer.
Just because her name was Emily?
No, it's two things.
And she's got the short hair?
She's British and looks a little bit like Emily Mortimer. We'll get into what she looks like and how that plays into the casting. Her name is Emily, but also I was mentally combining it with a completely different character because I have this image of Emily Mortimer in bed with a man going, my bones, don't forget about my bones, right? Because I was
what is that from?
It is from 30 Rock. Emily Mortimer, 10 years later than this, plays a love interest of Jack Donaghy's, and the joke is she has hollow bones like a bird, and so it's very dangerous for her to have sex because you might break all of her bones. She's like Samuel L. Jackson's character in Unbreakable. And so, and that's the kind of thing I could see them doing in Friends, a funny quirk like that for one of the girlfriends or boyfriends or whatever. So all of that got mixed up in the, juice
NBC
puree of my mind.
In your mind.
Yeah. And so all these years, and at that time I was, when I first watched these shows, I was probably just sort of learning about who Emily Mortimer was. It was like, oh, cool. It's this British lady who's a really good actress, shows up in things here and there. And so I think I just lumped this in with one of her many roles. And so, yeah, watching this, I was like, God, Emily Mortimer looks nothing like herself. Oh, that is not at all Emily
Not
Mortimer.
at all Emily Mortimer. Nope. The actress's name is Helen Baxdale, who plays Emily. And she has that short kind of bob cut that Emily Mortimer has in Newsroom.
Yeah, in a lot of her early roles.
Yeah.
She's in Scream 3. She looks just like that. While we're talking about this Helen Baxendale person, very funny name because we talked about how this kind of character is called the Baxter, right? The character that's just meant to be the romantic foil.
And what does that come from again?
It comes from a movie called The Baxter by Michael Showalter that sort of like takes the point of view of one of those kind of characters. What would it be like to go through life and always be the one who is, sort of providing the contrast for the person?
Like right before the real romance or the in-between, yeah. Yeah,
but we've talked before about how there's a specific way that they cast these roles. The person has to be attractive, obviously. They have to be, at a glance, a worthy competitor for whoever the protagonist lover is that we want to see them get together with. But with the women especially, always shorter hair, darker hair, harsher features. And my God, is that exactly what this casting is. It's like they grew this lady in a lab to be the perfect romantic foil for Jennifer Aniston. She's got the shorter hair, the darker hair, the lighter complexion, I would add. At this point, Jennifer Aniston always has that tan. She never looks like she did in the early seasons where she was pastier.
She's LA, right?
Yeah.
Super tan.
And so, this woman, I'm just looking at her going like, this is just like the platonic form, the distillation of who you cast against Jennifer Aniston to be the one that, like I said, is sort of a realistic rival, but not for a moment does anyone actually want Ross to get together.
Right. And they always have some sort of personality characteristic that makes them just a little annoying.
Well, in this case, and this is another recurring thing, you can invite your ex-girlfriend that you're still friends with to our wedding, right?
Right. Which Ross gets the okay and does invite her anyway. And she says, no, she's not coming because he doesn't know it yet. She's still in love with him. And then she has this whole conversation with Phoebe because this is kind of all happening sort of around the end of season 4, beginning of season 5. She has this whole conversation with Phoebe, who is very, very pregnant at the time, right? This is Lisa Kudrow's actual pregnancy that they wrote into the show.
Clearly.
Yeah. She herself, Lisa Kudrow, is actually pregnant, but in the show, she's carrying triplets for her brother.
Giovanni Ribisi.
Right. Giovanni Ribisi and her brother's wife, played by Deborah Foreman, right? Deborah Jo Rupp, who is Mrs. Foreman in the set.
And in Friends,
show.
Even though they're lovers, he calls her like Mrs. So-and-so.
Because she was his teacher, and so she can't have kids, so Lisa Kudrow's character Phoebe carries the kids. So anyway, so off the gang all goes to London, but Rachel and Phoebe stay behind, and then, Rachel has this big realization that she has to tell Ross because he should have all the information before.
Well, and let's just pause on that conversation between Rachel and Phoebe is an exact mirror image of the conversation between Schmidt and Nick that we're going to get later on in New Girl. And this is where I go like I don't want to be too grumpy about it and say like, this never happens, or, but this idea that like, it's just a fact that you're in love with this person and you don't know it. Everyone knows it, but we need to wake you up to what your real feelings are. Like, I don't know. It just, to me now as an old dude, like I think of love. A lot of these shows have this notion of like, it's just a thing. You are in love and you need to realize it yourself and make sure that that other person realizes it so that your life is not bad.
Right.
And it's like, now I think of love as like, I don't know, it's like this thing that happens through shared experiences and all the value and support that you provide for each other. It's like a very organic thing. It's not just like, they talk about it as though it's like being diabetic.
Well, struck by lightning.
Yeah, where it's just like, oh, there's this thing about you that like you need to realize, because again, it's like if you're a diabetic, you need to be on insulin. If you're in love, you need to get married or something.
Go be with the person.
Yeah, like they talk about it as this fact. And in both cases, it's like, you don't realize you're in love with this person. So we need to like help you discover your own feelings. That to me, again, I don't know if it feels false. Like maybe it feels like a younger person's notion of that, or just maybe a more like sort of romantical TV movie friendly version of that. It seemed odd to me.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm totally with you on that. Like I definitely have been in the situation, both on the being the person who had feelings that I was denying, and also being the person telling a friend, like, it is very clear that you really, really want to be with this person. And I've used the words, it's very clear that you're in love with them. And both times that I've had that experience, the telling a person, like, you love her. In that instance, the guy that I was telling was like, oh yeah, I know, but I just can't do anything about it. Like, so he knew, but he was just trying not to, which I think that's more of what's happening in the situation with Rachel. Because Rachel does know that she has feelings for him, but she's just trying really hard to be like, that's not, like, he's getting married. We've been through this over and over and over again, and we're just not going to do it anymore. We're just not. We're not going to be Sam and Diane. We're not going to be that toxic couple, right? Like, we're going to get past this and we're going to be friends, and we are friends, and that's good, and that's where we are. And then she just kind of like, as she's talking, sort of realizes, oh crap, yes, of course I love him. Yes, I'm never going to not love him, but there's nothing I'm going to do about it.
And this is what, to me, makes Ross and Rachel ultimately the weakest of all of the couples, even though in some ways they're the most iconic. Sam and Diane at least have the toxicity, like we've
and they
before.
At least don't end up together. Like
yes,
they're the only ones of our couples that don't end up together.
Yeah. But the fact that their passion is just born out of these crazy sparks that fly because they just can't stand each other. And so it's just this like wild experience every time the two of them are together. Look, we've discussed it to death. It's extremely unhealthy, but at least it's something.
Right.
With Ross and Rachel, it really is like one of you is the hottest lady in the world circa 1996, and one of you is smart, or like you had a crush on her in high school. Like it just seems like there's no there. Like it's so hard to drill down to like, why are they in love again? What is the deal here?
What's the deal with them? Yeah, look, so the thing I think with Ross and Rachel is it's more just like at a certain point you're exhausted. Like, just be together or don't be together, but stop with the nonsense, right? And I think we sort of see that after. So what's about to happen in the episode that I'm talking about, which is end of season 4, it's the one where Ross says Rachel. So at his wedding to Emily, there's been all sorts of shenanigans. Rachel goes over there to stop the wedding, or not really to stop the wedding, but just to tell Ross how she feels. So he, quote, has all the information, which is ridiculous. And then she gets there and she realizes that's a really shitty thing to do. Like, I'm not going to do that. And he sees her and is like, I'm so glad you came. Yay. And then he goes off to get married and says, I, Ross, take thee, Rachel.
Right. Now, I also wanted to mention, just backing up a little bit with the notion that she didn't originally plan to be at the wedding, even though their situation has completely changed since the episodes we watched 10 podcast episodes ago, I noticed immediately same dynamic. Ross yelling at her for her not being sufficiently, present. And it's something about work. It's her going, I can't go because of work. Now, granted, he is making the point, it's my wedding. You're one of my best friends. Like, you're okay, that there is something there. But I just noticed it was that same exact dynamic of him going, come on. How come you're not going to be there? And so it's like, Jesus, neediest guy in the world, this guy knows how to do nothing but complain that you're not giving him enough time and attention.
Right.
So, okay, Zibizuzu flashing back to she shows up at the wedding and, he's like, oh, great to see you. Again, another recurring thing with all these shows is like the one person's like, oh, we're in love. Great. And the other person hasn't caught on yet.
Right. I mean, look, Ross and Rachel have been doing this thing over the past couple of, or this season and a half since they had their official breakup that it just, they were going to be friends and it was going to be fine. And she was happy for him and it was all going to be okay. And this romance with Emily is quick. Like they meet and within 2 months they're in London getting married. Like it has been fast. Like one of the episodes before the wedding episode is called The One with All the Haste. And everyone's like, Ross, don't you think you're rushing into this? Like maybe you should slow down.
This is something that, again, the later shows are going to learn from.
Right.
Like maybe this isn't, Aeschylus or Shakespeare. Like maybe we don't have each character get married like 7 times throughout the course of the series. Just like turning down the temperature a little bit on the specific story beats.
Right, because if you had that much drama in your life, you would be a mess.
Yeah, no, these things are still in the tradition of like Shakespeare. It is very much like, oh, he didn't know that she was still alive, so he drank the poison potion, but then she came and saw he was poisoned, so she killed his whole family. Like it is just these huge swings.
Yeah, well, so, I mean, okay, so to that point, that makes Sam and Diane like Benedict and what's her name in Much Ado About Nothing. Who does that make Ross and Rachel?
Well, they're Romeo and Juliet.
Does they die at the end?
Not because they die, but just all the weird misunderstandings, and he didn't know that, and she didn't know this.
That's interesting. I don't know. I got to think on that. I wonder who Ross and Rachel would be in the Shakespearean rewrite. Okay, so he says Rachel's name at the wedding, all sorts of shenanigans go down. Then we're fast forwarding many seasons, right? So like after he says her name at the wedding, then Emily later on in season 5 gives him an ultimatum and is like, give up your friends. You can never see Rachel again if you want to be with me. And he ends up not doing that. And he says, no, I'm not going to give up my friends. So that all happens later on. Then she finally gives him a divorce. Then there's the one where they go to Vegas and Rachel and Ross get super drunk and they get married in Vegas. And then it takes like half a season for him to give her a divorce because he's hiding the fact that he didn't get it annulled immediately because he doesn't want another divorce. Yeah. And so there's all those shenanigans. 5 years later, right? Ross has said, I take thee, Rachel. So many things have happened. They've had a one-night stand. They've gotten pregnant. Rachel's had his child. The whole cast has now realized that Ross is the father of the child because of the red sweater that was left behind.
Monica and
right?
Chandler have their own thing that started in all the farcical craziness back in London.
That's right. Monica and Chandler get together in London, and now we're in the very last episode where Monica and Chandler are having twins. They don't know they're having twins, but they're having a baby. They've not been able to have children, so Courtney Cox's real life pregnancy is being hidden throughout these entire last few episodes of Friends because her character, Monica, is not able to get pregnant. Well, so it's the series finale, right, of Friends. So, of course, it's huge, and they're just doing so much. Rachel's deal is that she is moving to Paris, not for a finite amount of time,
right,
for an indefinite amount of time. She is taking a job in Paris for Ralph Lauren or Calvin Klein or whoever it is that she's working for at this time, right? She's moving to Paris. And so everyone's saying goodbye to her. And Monica and Chandler are giving up the apartment because they're stupid. Nobody gives up a rent-controlled apartment in the city.
I mean, we could record a 4-hour podcast just about the economics of how they live in that apartment. I know everybody always says, oh, no, but they inherited it from her mom.
Her
that
grandmother.
would not work. New York City would find some way of making you pay more rent than
you
they
have
could afford.
to be on on the lease for 2 years before the person dies, something like that.
Yeah,
but
just
anyway,
that apartment is palatial.
those rules are the rules that they live by, with them being able to inherit that apartment, don't exist in the city
Ross
anymore.
says it would be, quote unquote, too sad to take over Monica's apartment.
That's right.
When she offers it to him. No, you do that above anything else.
That's right.
There has never
We've
been
seen that
an
on
easier
an episode
question.
of Seinfeld, right? That's what Elaine's always trying to like surf the obituaries to see if
this
she
is
can get an
before the
apartment.
birth of Airbnb. You could make a fortune with that place.
Oh my gosh. So anyway, so the apartment's being let go because they want a bigger space for the baby, even though they have a palatial 2-bedroom, whatever. So they're going to move away as well. So everybody's life is like moving on and changing, and that's what's going on. Well, Rachel says goodbye to each person in turn. This is the one right before the last one, right?
Yeah.
So she's saying goodbye to everybody in turn. She doesn't have like a special goodbye for Ross. And Ross gets all upset and he goes over. At this point, she's living in Joey's apartment because Chandler's moved in with Monica in her old apartment. So Ross goes across the hall and is like, what the hell? You said goodbye to everybody. You didn't say goodbye to me. Like, you're such a dick. And she's like, you're stupid. I didn't say goodbye to you because you're the hardest one to say goodbye to, not because I don't care about you.
Yeah, same needy energy. Now Schwimmer is full into his over-the-top acting mode. We talked in the early episodes about how he hadn't gotten there yet. He's still acting like a human being. Now he is enrolled in the school of Jim Carrey. He's doing the thing. It's his own version of it, but he's loud and exaggerated. And whenever he plays exasperated, which is quite a lot of the time, that's just how his character is, he always goes for this, like he's just so flailing and, you know, jumping all over the place with the pitch of his voice and everything. And yeah, kind of annoying. And so, you know, you combine that acting style with the way the character is written, which is, again, just consistently needy, selfish, lacking in empathy or perspective. And yeah, it's frustrating as hell, even though, like, he has more of a leg to stand on in these situations than he did in the ones we were talking about last time, where it's like he wouldn't even let her go to work or whatever because it's like their 3-week dating anniversary or something. Like, now at least he's talking about serious things.
Yeah, I mean, they have grown up quite a bit.
Yeah,
it's been 10 years and they have a child together.
Still that same, what about me? Come on. It just drives me crazy. So yeah, he goes over there and starts yelling at her, and she says, she's going to give several different versions of this speech throughout these episodes, where it's like, if you think that I'm being shitty to you, it's just because, I'm overcome by my feelings and I don't know what else to do.
Right. And I thought, because I had forgotten the way this whole last episode, it's a double episode, the way it plays out, right? For some reason, I thought that she was going to say, I don't feel like I have to say goodbye to you. You're the father of my child. Like, we're going to be in each other's lives forever. This isn't goodbye. Like, you're going to come over and see your kid in 3 weeks. But that's not where they went with it, because that's not what they do in Friends. Everything is like an ending. We've got to say goodbye. This is TV land. This is what we do. And so, so she's like, no, you mean more to me than anybody else. So it's too hard for me to try to say goodbye to you. I couldn't even come up with the words. And so he's like, oh, okay. And then how do they end up like making out?
It's because it's the emotional nature of that conversation, like he comes in all hot and heavy. Grr, I hate you. Everyone else got a special custom made goodbye except me. And then she delivers that whole heartfelt speech about how, when I think about not having you around, it makes me not want to go. You're the most important thing in my life, blah, blah, blah. And she just, she gets into that, and that just naturally leads to them. He goes over, kisses her, she kisses him, and their emotions take over.
Right, but that doesn't happen in the Joey apartment, because she wakes up at Ross's house. So she must have followed him back to his house at some point to continue the conversation.
I think that's what happened.
Because it's like a two-part conversation.
Yeah, you're right. It is. They cut away and cut back, and they're in a second location. But the note that I have is literally Rachel yells at Ross, "You mean more to me," and then an arrow, and then the word sex. So it is very much like one thing led to the other.
Yes. And that is what happens, right? So she wakes up at his house and they're saying, she says goodbye to him and she's, goes on home. And then, later that day, Ross comes over to the apartment. Joey and Phoebe are there and Rachel is asleep. They're talking and he immediately is like grinning ear to ear and is like, yeah, I don't want to kiss and tell, but I do want to have sex and tell. Yeah.
And that's when we get this sort of sitcom-y difference of perspective, like we were talking about. One of these like, you don't say it first. Let me say my thing first because I know we're both on exactly the same page.
Right.
And
yeah. Ross is like, I've got to tell her that I'm in love with her. And then she comes out of the bedroom and is like, oh, that was just the perfect way to say goodbye.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like they're both overjoyed at having had sex again, but they're taking it two different ways. And he thinks that means, oh, so we're in love again and, we're going to be together. And she thinks that that was the perfect way to end our relationship.
Right. And so now we've got the whole back and forth through the rest of this double episode. Is Ross going to come clean and tell Rachel that he doesn't want her to go and that he's in love with her and he doesn't want to do it and then is like, okay, I'm going to do it. And then Gunther gets there before him and she blows Gunther off, of course, because she's not in love with Gunther. And he's like, oh, I don't want to get rejected like Gunther.
Gunther is the Toby of Friends. This same exact relationship that Toby has with Pam is what Gunther has with Rachel.
Right.
And this was something as I started to get older and I was still like, kind of ogling the young project managers at the agency and stuff. This is what I would have these sort of harsh realizations where I'd be like, you are Gunther in this situation. You're not
Toby.
Ross or
You're
Chandler.
dude in the other room looking at the girl who is totally interested in the young guy.
You're not like the one option or the other. You are like this extra party that is not even part of the main cast.
Oh, no.
But anyway, Gunther sort of steals Ross's thunder, so he doesn't get a chance to do that. So we get what is definitely a subtrope of rom-coms for years to come, right? The mad dash to the airport.
Gotta go to the airport. And then guess what? They end up at JFK, but her flight's leaving out of Newark. And so all of the, crazy Phoebe driving in the cab and silly things happening there. And so cell phones have come into play now. So Phoebe calls Rachel on her cell phone and is like, hey, don't get on the plane. There's an issue with the plane, trying to keep her from getting on the plane so that she can steal back some time and make it to Newark Airport because they went to JFK by accident. And Rachel's laughing at her and she's like, no, the plane's left phalanges broken. And so she, Rachel laughs this off and then turns to her seatmate, who is the dean from Community.
Yeah, Jim Rash from Community.
Oscar Award winner Jim Rash. And says to him, oh, my friend's being so silly. She says, there's something wrong with the plane. She had a vision or whatever. And he flips out and gets all the passengers to freak out and leads a rebellion to get everybody off the plane.
Yeah, it's this is a thing. And, you had it in Seinfeld, too, the idea of everybody has their go-to lie. George Costanza had his Art Vandelay thing.
Right.
Phoebe has
Regina Phalange.
Yeah. In the first episode we watched where she's trying to stop Rachel from going to Ross's wedding, she's calling everybody claiming to be Regina Phalange. And then when she wants to say something's wrong with the plane, it's the phalange. So that's just her word whenever she needs to make something up that sounds real.
Right.
And so, I noticed we're getting into the era of if you've got a little bit of money behind your show, you can start licensing popular music, because when they discover they're at JFK and they should be at Newark, the beginning of Yellow Ledbetter by Pearl Jam starts playing, which is this great, very sad sounding song that has notoriously incomprehensible lyrics. No one can understand what he's saying, but they don't play the lyrics to that song. They just play the beginning. And then that sort of, it culminates in they do intercept Rachel at Newark Airport but she gets on the plane anyway.
Yeah, he stops her and he's like, hey, I don't want you to go. I'm in love with you. And he's like holding on to her and won't let her go. And she's just like, I can't handle this right now. I can't. Like how, like any normal person would be, by the way, if you like accosted them at the airport and were like trying to do the rom-com thing, don't go, I love you. She's like, I can't. And so she gets on the plane.
Yeah. I guess the way it all sort of ends is the drama of answering machines, right? This whole scenario is
we're in that weird world where we still have landlines and answering machines and cell phones.
Yeah, no, exactly. They are coexisting. And the cell phones are still kind of like a fancy thing. And so, voicemail is something we still have, but nowadays you're just like, oh, I missed a call. Let me see what my voicemail was. Whereas in this case...
Or you just call the person back and never listen to your voicemail like I do.
In this case, Ross goes back to his apartment. He's all dejected. And then he starts listening to his answering machine and hearing her in real time be like, Ross, what can I say? You know, of course I love you, but wait a minute, I love you. You know, like it's not quite as silly as that, but it basically is that. It's like her talking in a way that like, oh my God, I've realized what my true feelings are.
It's very similar to the conversation she had with Phoebe before she goes to stop the wedding, where she just like talks herself into making a rash decision to go and be with Ross.
Yes. Now, we haven't mentioned this yet, but someone who has a very clear opinion about whether or not Ross and Rachel should get together is the studio audience, right?
Yes.
In all of these episodes, maybe if they think they have us fooled that Ross, you know, is planning to spend the rest of his life with Emily, they're not fooling anyone in the audience, because we get huge clapping, ovations, whatever, anytime like somebody makes a decision. You know, anytime someone says like, I'm going to go try to stop the plane. Woo! Yeah. You know, everyone goes crazy. And so in this case, it's like Ross is listening to her leave the message, and then she's, you know, talking to the flight attendant or whatever, and then the message ends.
Right. She's like, I got to get off this plane. I got to get off this. And it beep, and that's the end of the message. Yeah,
and so Ross is like, my God, what happens? And then, you know, we pan over. Rachel is standing in the doorway. She says, I got off the plane, and the crowd goes wild.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's the end of the series, right? Like, that's it. They kiss in the end.
Yeah, I mean, we have all of the, you know, sentimental stuff with the friends getting together and them, you know.
Oh, that's right. They say goodbye to the apartment one more time, and then they say, let's go have coffee.
Yeah, the series ends, you know, again, that last scene is more devoted to saying goodbye to the series and the cast at large. But so, yeah, look, what can we say? You know, there was so much back and forth. And at the end, I sort of have my same criticism. Like, what Friends provides us is lots of fun stuff along the way. You know, like just as we're going through the episodes, clicking through to the next one, and you're passing all the episodes in between, and you see all the craziness. You see how, like, after that debacle in London with the wedding, they kind of shift gears a little bit and focus more on Phoebe and her, you know, all different things.
And Monica and Chandler, they have their whole relationship happens between the wedding and, you know, that last season. Like, that's it. They're the will they, won't they, right? Because they've got to figure that whole thing out. And then, like, you know, the whole, like, she ends up proposing to him, and then he's like, no.
And they smartly avoid their will they, won't they it's not the same stuff. It's not like we're going to break up and hate each other, and now we love each other, and now we cheated on each other. Like, there's a little more subtlety to it.
They've been such good friends for so long that it's more just about, like, how do you go from friends to a relationship, and, you know, do we even want to do that? Because they were, you know, both, one's a commitment phobe and all that. So that to me was a really nice departure. Like, I was tired of Ross and Rachel.
And because they
start a very long time.
Yeah, and because they give them more, like, dare I say, real life things to deal with. Like, what are the things that real life couples actually have to confront? It's not just, you cheated on me, let's break up. Like, it is more nuanced things, like just the challenges of life. And I feel like that's what the Monica Chandler stories were about. Obviously, all the stuff, with them having to adopt the kids and everything, lots of stuff with that. But yeah, Friends has lots of fun comedy and characters and situations and everything. But it is funny how they just sort of take it for granted. Like, come on, it's Jennifer Aniston. What? They're in love. It's Ross and Rachel. Come on, and they don't really flesh out their relationship in the ways that we'll see in the later shows. And so when you watch it now, it is kind of like, what is this even,
Yeah. And look, I think with Ross and Rachel, if you watch the entire thing, it's a lot, right? But that series can't end without them being together. It's the construct of the series. You couldn't do that to an audience as a writing staff. You just couldn't, they have to end up together. It's, Phoebe said it in season 1, he's her lobster, I think they are just kind of like meant to be, and they've been denying it for so long.
Yeah. And like we said, the show at that time, or TV in general, didn't have the savvy to just wrap them up and give them their happy ending before it got too annoying. They sort of did by shifting the focus away, right. But they're still going to have them be, wrestling over this until the very end. And it's almost like a side note, but Rachel gives up her job, I guess.
Yeah. As always, right? That's what he wanted in the first place. Yeah. No, I mean, I guess I'm sure they work something out, but the point of it is that the end of Friends is not like everybody lives happily ever after and there's nothing going on after it. It very much is like a new beginning. So their 20s, early 30s are now over, and they're settling into, life as 35 plus, and life looks different when you're settling down. And so it's almost like if we could just now move it into, like a Modern Family or something like that. Like it would just be a different show if we were to pick up here at the beginning of a show where there's, 3 couples, and then Joey as like the crazy single friend, and there's babies in the mix, and we're parents. And so it's a different show. Yeah.
I like it. I'd tune in.
I'd watch it.
All right. Moving on to The Office.
Season 5, episodes 1 and 2, weight loss.
Yeah. So this has a fun sort of device where it's a double episode that, because it's a season premiere, it takes place over the whole summer. It's framed by this thing. The sort of A story, technically, is that The Office wants to lose weight. Amy Ryan's character, Holly, who's the HR rep, has initiated this company-wide thing where all the branches are going to compete, to see who can lose the most weight, and they have to weigh each other every week for 8 weeks. So it's like week 1, week 2, week 3. So I thought that was just a fun device where if you're going to be off of the show for a summer, to sort of come back and have that be the season premiere and have this fun way of detailing how it takes place over this longer stretch of time.
Right.
And this is going to be another case where we have a character leaving town for a while.
Yes.
I think this is going to be, in a lot of ways, a more nuanced handling of a lot of these things. But let's back up for a second. We last left Jim and Pam not in a breakup state because they were never together, but at this sort of low point where Jim was back from working at Stanford. The Stanford and Scranton branches had merged. Pam had realized that he was dating Karen, Rashida Jones's character. Their relationship was all awkward. It was sort of like everything's different now. We can't even be buddies at work anymore. And Pam has called off her wedding. And so for her especially, it's really kind of like lose-lose. So yeah, that was kind of where we were. And then what has happened?
So in the meanwhile, and we talked about this a little bit on the last episode of the podcast, because of the weird place that they didn't really ever get together, so we didn't really have a breakup for them. But so what happens in the meantime is that Karen and Jim do break up. Pam and her boyfriend got back together.
Yes.
Right? And so then Jim applies for this job at corporate, which would take him to New York. And then Pam like re-breaks up with the ex, with Roy. And Jim decides not to go for the job, kind of takes himself out of the running for the corporate job and comes back and sticks his head in on one of Pam's little one-on-one interviews with the mockumentary cameras that are there and says, hey, do you want to go grab dinner tonight? Great, it's a date. And so that is the beginning of them dating. And then they date secretively for a long time. And then there's an episode, which you alluded to before, with the Toby of it all.
Yeah.
So there's an episode where Jim and Pam have been dating, but they haven't told anybody at the office. It's been a couple of months, and Toby sees them giving each other a kiss in the break room.
Yeah. And he's jealous and annoyed because, again, he's the Gunther of this situation. Right. He's the non-entity that's like, what about me?
Oh, I want Pam to like me. And so he circulates an office memo about the company policy on PDA. And everyone's like, what is this having to do with?
Well, it's funny because of all of the other subplots that have happened over the years, everyone has a guilty conscience. Right. You know, Dwight and Angela are like, whoa, what's this PDA stuff? I didn't do anything. And Michael thinks it's about him and Holly and stuff. And so, yeah, it forces Toby to be like, no, guys, I meant it to be for Jim and Pam. And that's how Michael finds out about their relationship. And he performs this ridiculous like wedding ceremony, which is just the ceremony of him knowing that they're a couple.
Right.
And yeah, and that's the only step that you kind of skipped over in the Fun Run episode. Pam gives this speech when she's just run over the hot coals, where she sort of says, Jim, you're the reason why I broke up my wedding. And now, you know, you're dating someone else. And, you know, this is all so strange. And, you know, I mentioned that just to say, you know, sort of like what you're saying, we get these little bits, you know, these little moments with Jim and Pam. We never have an episode that's devoted to their relationship.
Right.
Because in so many ways, I'm realizing this, like, as I talk about these episodes, The Office solves for that Ross and Rachel thing, and it almost flips it, where The Office is going to be all show, don't tell. It's going to show us why they're good together. It's going to show us why their personalities click with each other and why it makes sense for the two of them to be together. All of the soap operas of he asks her and she says no, and how did he make the move and this and that, we very rarely get to see any of that. We get these precious little moments of it.
Well, and that's because the people that they confide in are not at work.
Yeah, but yeah, that's the reason within the story of the show. But I feel like for us watching it, it gives us a break from all this crazy soap opera of, don't you realize you're in love with him? You know, I need to tell her.
Don't you know you love Pam?
Yeah, or I need to get to the airport so she knows I love her. You know, instead, it's just more of like, no, again, we're just going to show you why they have such a good time together and why their personalities fit together so well. And so you, the audience, want them to get together, not just because they're hot or because the show is telling you that they've been in love with each other for years.
All this time, right. Well, so now everybody knows that they're together. That kind of gets us there. There was an earlier episode where Jim was going to propose, but then Andy jumps in and proposes to Angela at the last minute. And so Jim's like, okay, well, I'm not going to do it now.
So again, the thing of we've got lots of buns in the oven at this point, literally in terms of pregnancies often, but in terms of other relationships happening. Yeah, we've got this ongoing thing. Angela is still having an affair with Dwight, but she's now engaged to Andy, Ed Helms' character, essentially against her will. we shouldn't spend too much time on it, but it's very funny. Andy's sycophantic nature and the way he's just such a people pleaser, and he's always just, he just has no backbone. And she is like evil, basically.
Right.
And she's just like,
queen.
Yeah, she's like, I am not going to agree to any of your wedding plans. So there's a point where he's like, I have purchased non-refundable deposits at 4 different wedding venues. Take your pick. Here are the brochures. It's like Epcot Center. It's all these different things. And her response is she just gives one word per option. She goes, dangerous, tacky, sharks, haunted. It's great. Angela Kinsey just killing it. But yeah, there's very funny, stuff going on with them, with Michael and Holly's budding romance.
Right. And Jan is pregnant. So Jan is like still around doing her candles thing.
Right.
But...
Not with Michael's baby,
right.
But part of his character trait of inserting himself into the middle of everything, he still considers that like a thing that's happening to him, that
right.
she's pregnant.
Well, and she shows up and makes him give her foot massages at his work.
That's true. But yeah, in terms of Jim and Pam, what we've got here is, again, I need to leave town for this thing I want to do.
Right.
But we're going to get a much more sensible version of it where it's going to show you, yes, that will create a strain maybe on the relationship and create complications, but it is not this A or B thing where it's like, we have to say goodbye forever because you're doing this internship.
Right. She's going up to the Pratt Institute in New York City to do an internship or a program, like a 3-month graphic design program. So she's off, and that's at the beginning of the summer. And then in like week 8, when they're doing the very last weigh-in, Jim has just kind of had enough. Like, he's missing her. He hasn't seen her in about 10 days. Like, we get at some point earlier in the episode, he's gone up to visit her and he's just missing her. He's missing his partner in crime and his, girlfriend outside of work and all of that. He's just missing her.
We're getting the beginnings of another Baxter situation with Rich Summers.
Right. Rich Summer plays a friend that she's made.
A classmate.
In class. And they, he's kind of a jokester and she
darker,
laughs.
shorter hair.
Yes, darker, shorter hair. And she, they have a friendship, but it's not anywhere near the level of like
no, but it's
Pam
going
and Jim.
to blossom. What we don't see in the episode we watched is, he's, again, The Office is smart. It knows better than to paint him as some sort of serious interloper that's really a threat to Jim. But there is a scene where he pitches to her, you should stay in New York longer.
Right.
And, it is definitely
in a later
thing.
episode. Yeah, for sure. So, Jim's just kind of getting more and more over it and missing her. And so he says, hey, can we meet midway, at that rest stop midway and have lunch? And she says, sure.
So yeah, he says, let's meet at that rest stop halfway. Now, when they get there, he's going to propose.
Yeah, it's pouring down rain.
Yes. Now, what's so cool about this to me is, The Office saddles itself with that faux documentary style, right? And so because it is a mockumentary, they can't do the kinds of things that Friends does when it wants to go for an iconic moment and it gets all cinematic and they put a little bit more money into some cool camera glides and musical score and stuff like that. The Office can't do any of that. It has to stick with the mise en scène, if you will, of a documentary. But with this scene, they still managed to make this really cool, iconic moment where the documentary crew is shooting them from like across the freeway.
Yeah.
Because again, it's like...
And Pam isn't mic'd.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
You're only hearing what she's saying that's being picked up on Jim's mic.
Yeah, they're using the limitations of this documentary format in really cool ways. They're filming from, across this busy freeway. So you're getting, a stylistic choice that a movie may or may not make of shooting them from far away. So you see all the cars passing by, in between the camera and them and all the rain and everything. And then, you're hearing, the whole vibe of of it is sort of dampened by not hearing the sound directly. And so you have to like listen really close. And so it sort of keeps you at a distance and makes you feel like, again, like they did in the episode where they first kissed and everything, where it's like you're seeing something you're not really supposed to see. And it's just really cool the way they use those limitations and do it in a way that it's not just like another scene of The Office. It still feels special.
Yeah, and it is. And so you don't hear very much of the dialogue. Like it is, you hear mostly rain and car sounds.
Yeah.
And so, of course, she says yes, and all is happy. And then Jim goes back to the office for the final weigh-in, and he's soaking wet, and he's grinning from ear to ear. He looks like Ross did when he gets back to Joey's apartment the next day, in the last episode that we watched. So yeah, they, he's super happy, and he does not share with the office what has happened, and off we go into Jim and Pam land.
Yeah. And so look, like we always say, The Office does a great job of creating these characters and this relationship that feels real and that you really buy into. It's not necessarily great for us and our podcast of picking specific episodes and talking about their dopey sitcom tropes, because
right.
This is a smart show and it is so organic and human. And so, yeah, it's like you can't say, oh, well, it's not about their relationship that much. No, it totally is. But it's about their relationship the way it would be in real life, where as you're doing other things, as you're dealing with the various challenges and crazy things that happen in your work, you grow together like that and you see your personalities manifest in these different situations. And yeah, just their shared sense of humor and everything. And so it's always there for you to enjoy. But like I said before, it's the opposite of Ross and Rachel. It's not going to be, this is the one where she has to tell him she loves him. And this is the one where he's mad because she slept with somebody else. It doesn't have those operatic moments. And yeah, like we were talking about, it does the smart thing of getting them together now and kind of moving on with its life. So we don't need to have the Sam and Diane thing of like, all right, year 7, everybody, guess what? They still love each other, but hate each other.
Yeah. And so moving forward, next major story beat with Pam and Jim, obviously we have a little bit of the like complication there towards the end of her time in New York. At some point, she realizes that, like, she's just not good at graphic design.
Well,
right?
That's an interesting thing to talk about because it's something we mentioned when we first met them, how, like, part of what they have in common is they're both kind of rudderless and they're not people that are, like, super into their interests,
right.
Which is something that I think is very real, but something that I don't relate to. Like I was the 7-year-old kid going like, I want to be a filmmaker. And if that doesn't work, I'm going to be a novelist. And if that doesn't work, I'm going to be a comic book artist, and it's just like this thing of like, yeah, I don't really know what I want to do. Like many people are like that. And yeah, I think Jim and Pam really embody that sort of person that's like a very, sort of high caliber, smart person and somebody that you would really want to have around, but is just not aspirational in terms of like their job or even like their specific interests. And so this thing, the way they treat Pam's art, it borders on being a little mean, or it's just so unusual to see a character in a show like this where it's about her being kind of mediocre,
right,
and her being not that good. And it's been pretty consistent with that from the start, where it's like that Pam's thing is she's into art, but not that much. And she's kind of good at it, but not really. And again, like it really gets points for the realism of that, but it does leave you in a place of like it's hard to know what to make of it. And when she does end up, the story resolves itself by her just going like, you know what? Jim is like, don't
give up on your dream.
Yeah,
like,
don't
let's
wash
do
out
this. Yeah.
for us. And her going like, no, I thought about it and I just don't really want to do it that much. I'd rather be home with you. yeah, like it just kind of leaves you going like, okay, I guess that's one thing you can do.
Yeah. And so I think there's a lot of talk out there of like, oh, Jim wasn't really that supportive. And this is where he gets like the bad, a little bit of a bad rap, like the same way people talk about Ross. And I've said it before, I wonder if 10 years from now, I'll have a different take on the Jim of it all, but I don't see it. I don't see him as being this like, kind of selfish bad guy.
Definitely not.
I think he is supportive of what she wants to do, and she's the one that maybe she doesn't have the ambitions, or maybe she's just scared. But whatever it is, she chooses to do the thing that's comfortable. And by the way, as a middle-aged person, I know so many people that's what they've done, and they're happy. Yeah. Like what we would call settling in our mid-20s, early 30s, like in the Friends age, right? Like that. What these characters are doing, and is settling, but it definitely leads to happy lives. Like there's no shame or any like no shade thrown at all against Pam and Jim for deciding that like this is what we want, and what we want is to like be married, have kids, and get by.
Oh yeah, definitely. You just compare like Schwimmer's whole vibe with Ross and the way he's talking and throwing himself around and everything. Pivot! You compare that to like Krasinski just being like cool as a cucumber, just very like gentle, understanding,
making funny faces to the camera. So that's kind of like the next beat that happens with Jim and Pam. And then the beat after that is we find out they're pregnant before they actually have the wedding.
Yeah, by the time they're having kids and, the Niagara wedding and everything, those are iconic in their own right. Right. I feel like we'll do our deep dives on them in good times, but it becomes all about, just how...
In good time. This is the end of their story. We got to talk about it now. But you mean to say that we will very likely do like a best wedding episodes at some point?
Oh, sure. I think, to me, like the will they, won't they is sort of the show wisely never really goes back on that to me.
They don't string out the drama once they're together in ways that all these other shows do.
Yeah, they hint at it a little bit in the later seasons. There's... when we get to when we revisit our tempted by a sexy coworker trope, there is an episode where there's a younger girl that, Jim has to kind of fend off. They do stuff like that here and there. But I feel like obviously their story continues indefinitely. But the will they, won't they, in a sense, was wrapped up, like somewhere in the middle there.
Yeah,
like we as viewers.
I think from the minute they started dating, right?
Yeah.
Which is why Pam and Jim have been the harder one, I think, to kind of pin to this 5-act narrative, because so much of, like you're saying, what they've done solving for the Ross and Rachel problem is doing so many things off camera, or having all of those heartfelt conversations about what am I going to do? How am I going to tell Pam this? That happened with Jim and his friends outside of work at a bar that we never see.
Yeah. In a sense, you see the beginnings here of what a lot of shows would pick up on. Like I'm thinking about Party Down, right? And how each episode of that is like the Yerkenstein bar mitzvah, the, volcano rap party or whatever. And it's like, every episode is going to be focused around an event that is organic to the premise of the show. And then within that, we'll figure out our character drama and stuff. The Office does that. So instead of being like, well, here's the one where they get in a fight, and here's the one where he cheats on her, and here's the one where they argue about this thing, it's like, no, here's the one where they learn fire safety at work, and here's the one where they have to have layoffs or whatever. Like they have these premises that have to do with the show, and they sort of, they work in the character drama through that, so it doesn't have to be these crazy operatic stories every time about their relationships.
Yeah.
And so at the end of the day, I feel like it's, we've been saying this the whole time. It's much easier to buy into Jim and Pam as a couple than at least Sam and Diane and Ross and Rachel. Like, we feel like we could go on a double date with them and not, not be cringing our way through
right.
it.
Not having a hard time. Now, speaking of another couple, I think we'd be able to go on a double date with Nick and Jess.
Yes.
They fall somewhere in between Jim and Pam and Ross and Rachel.
Yeah, totally. So I'll take that as our signal to move on to New Girl.
Season 6, episode 22, 5 stars for Beezus.
Yeah, it's funny that we frame it like that, going on the double dates, because it's a testament, I feel like, to how well drawn these characters are, that I could totally picture that, the difference between being on a double date with Jim and Pam versus Nick and Jess, and they would be completely different experiences. Like, I feel like Jim and Pam would be more my speed. Like, it would be subdued, and we would sort of get off to conversation kind of gently and slowly. Whereas Nick and Jess, I feel like you and Jess would immediately just be like going 100 miles an hour.
Talking about school.
Yeah, or just the eccentricities would just be like flying.
Yes, but you and Nick, I think, would get along pretty well because you're both just like
in our grumpiness.
quiet, grumpy dudes in hoodies. Like,
yeah, no, that checks out. So yeah, here we are. Again, we've skipped a lot between where we last were and now, but I have to say, like, yes, there have been intervening lovers. We had Megan Fox as Reagan.
Yes.
We had Randy, I think was the name of the kind of dorky guy that Jess was with for a while. Stories come and go, but I feel like there's not a whole lot of crazy soap opera stuff that we have to catch up on to talk about them. They've been broken up since they were broken up.
Right. And so even though like it took Jess a while to kind of get over him and then he was like realizing, like, so Reagan kind of realized early on that if she and Nick were really going to be a thing, then she really did need Jess's blessing. And Jess had like a nice heart to heart with herself and Cece and was like, am I going to be okay with this or am I not? And was like, you know what? You have my blessing and I am going to be okay with this. And then as things got more and more and more serious, she realized she wasn't getting over Nick. So she had to leave. And so then Reagan and Nick end up doing like a long distance kind of thing because Reagan gets a promotion at work. That means she's traveling a lot more. And Jess moves away. Like Jess takes the summer vacation from her work and goes and stays in Portland, Oregon with her dad. And while she's there, she's just like having all of these feelings and trying to get over Nick. And she realizes that it's just not going to happen. And so she is going to have to move out of the loft. And so Nick, in the meanwhile, now we're up to this episode. So Nick has broken up with Reagan a few episodes earlier, and Jess has already been in Portland. And so he goes to call Jess to tell her that he's broken up with Reagan, but he doesn't get her because she's on her way back to just have a conversation with him and be like, look, I feel this way about you and I'm sorry that it's a mess, right? So she goes to his book signing.
Yes, we should mention he is a published author at this point.
Well, no, he's not published. He's self-published. Remember, they self-published the book because she realized that her students loved it and it was a YA novel.
Yes, this is the Pepperwood Chronicles.
That's right. So you got Pepperwood, who is always like his alter ego.
Yeah,
like we're speaking of like Regina Phalange, right? And his girl Friday.
It's like Michael Scarn from Michael Scott.
His girl Friday is Jessica Knight.
Yes, of
and
course.
So she goes to the reading. She's in the very back. He doesn't see her. And one of the kids in the audience is like, hey, are, Pepperwood and Jessica Knight ever going to get together? And he is like, look, that's just never going to happen. These characters are real people. And so anyway, so he explains it. And Jess only hears the first part, that they're just never going to get together because that's not the way they feel about each other. And she loses, like Ross does after the Gunther situation, loses all her nerve and walks out and goes and tells Cece, that's it. I've got to move out of the loft. He's never going to love me. He doesn't feel that way about me. But what she doesn't hear him say, because she is run off, is that it was his fault that Pepperwood took his shot and messed it up. And so he can never go back and fix that now. And so Jessica Knight will never want him. And so that's like where we are when we have the Schmidt and Nick conversation.
Yeah, of course, again, we have interest from the publishing world. We've got that little subtrope. Will Hines is
Yes.
the editor who wants Nick to let him publish his Pepperwood book. Yeah, we get, like you said, Nick and Schmidt sort of talking through their feelings. We also get, earlier when Jess is en route to that book signing, like she's really on a mission to tell Nick how she feels. I get big Rachel vibes off of her. This is, even though it's going to be handled very differently, and I think much better, we get the same, a lot of the same thing of these two-person conversations where it's like, I am in love, that is a fact about me that I need to share, or you are in love and that is a fact about you that you need to acknowledge, and that's going to be what Schmidt tells Nick, or what Schmidt sort of coaxes out of Nick, is that like, yeah, you've loved Jess this whole time. You just don't realize it.
Yeah. And he is like, you have been in love with her since the moment you saw her when she arrived at the loft. And Nick was like, no, teeing up this cute thing that's going to happen later on. He's like, no, I didn't first see her when she walked into the loft. The first time I saw her was when I was looking out the window and she couldn't get into the building and she'd lost her glasses and she was bopping around. And it was so funny. Actually, it was really cute and da-da-da-da. And Schmidt's like, do you see what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Like, you can't, everything she does is cute to you. Like, you're in love with her. And he's like, oh, but he doesn't even really like make the realization when Schmidt says it.
We have Schmidt says something similar to the sentiment in the Cheers episode where he says, how could I not care? I've been watching these idiots do this dance for 6 years. He's sort of
Right.
calling question. Yeah, this has been happening forever.
By the end of this episode, they're back together, right? They get back together. That's what ends up happening. There's a lot of like back and forth, and Nick realizes that he does love her when he's talking to the publishing guy, because the publishing guy wants him to kill off the Jessica Knight character.
Right. We get these very analogous characters, like you said.
And he's like, no, I can never do that. He's only, Pepperwood's only who he is because of Jessica Knight.
Jessica Knight's the only reason why Jake Pepperwood gets out of bed in the morning.
Yeah. And that's when he realizes. So the Schmidt speech didn't really work, but it planted a seed. And then he realizes it when he has this conversation. And meanwhile, Jess has completely emptied out her room. She had this whole ruse where she was going to do it when Nick was at this meeting with the publisher. So she had like 3 hours. She could pack everything up and load it into a van and be out of there. So she didn't have to see him, and she didn't have to try to like come back another time and run into him or anything like that. She just has to get out of there. And so in the meanwhile, Winston and Nasim Pedrad, who plays his girlfriend, they're the ones, and Cece they're helping her pack up and move. So Nick is like, that's it. I got to go get Jess before she leaves. And then he gets back to the apartment and she's already gone. Her room is totally empty. He's all sad. And Jess is in the van and on the radio, speaking of needle drops, right? We've talked about this since the beginning with Nick and Jess. Jess listens to or watches Dirty Dancing when she's sad. And I Had the Time of My Life comes on the radio in the moving van. And she's like, stop, you've got to stop. And she jumps out of the moving van and runs back to the loft.
Yeah, because that was in our Meet Cute episode number 1. Yeah, that was the sort of denouement, if you will, of that story. It was, Nick and all the guys really, singing Time of My Life to Jess, who was upset about her date. And it was a callback to earlier in the episode. She loves that song.
And then throughout the series, every time there's a breakup, they have this thing of like where they're on the couch, usually Jess, but then the guys start picking up on it too, because it is a good movie to watch when you're sad, right? Like nobody puts Barry in the corner. And so, she comes back to the loft, and then there's the funny, like, she takes the stairs up and he takes the elevator down.
And I noticed this is a signature of TV shows from this time, I think. That, you know, you talked about The Time of My Life, Needle Drop, but then this segues into this whole ending sequence being set to the song Green Light by Lorde. And I feel like shows at this time, everything from Grey's Anatomy to The Walking Dead, right, would love to pull this maneuver of
where it's like a music video.
Yeah, I'm going to find a song that I really like. The director or the editor would just really like a certain song and re-edit it, chop it up, mix it with some orchestral elements or whatever, and really build the whole last, 6-7 minutes of the show around this popular song.
Yeah, and there's no dialogue. They're just like kind of, like I said, she takes the stairs up, he takes the elevator down, then they see each other again and they're like, don't move. And then they both do it again. And then we get that, like, for Nick and Jess fans, it's an iconic moment. Jess, grumpy dude, is kind of barking at this guy in the elevator who is got a bunch of boxes on a dolly, and he's like, could you go any slower? I gotta tell my best friend that I love her. And then he moves out of the way, and Jess is in the elevator right behind him. She's smiling from ear to ear. He gets in the elevator, the doors close, and when they ding open, they're just like in a full embrace making out.
Yeah. And so, look, in a lot of ways, it has the same thing that I was criticizing Friends for, of like, being in love with a capital L is just a fact. And it's like, well, I need to share that knowledge. But in this one, it makes so much more sense. It's much more organic, where like, oh, sure, she split town for a few weeks, and then being away from him, discovered how much she likes having him around, and how, and how connected they are. Like, that makes sense. Having this relationship with a character like Megan Fox, and realizing all the ways that a woman like that is different than Jess, and how, he appreciates all of her quirkiness more. Like, it all just makes a lot more sense. And like we were saying with Friends, the beats aren't operatic. It's like, you date somebody else. You don't get married to them. Right. Like it's just not these crazy pendulum swings that make it like this wild soap opera. Like it just feels more real.
They definitely do have that kind of stuff though earlier on, like before they're getting together with the Sam, and then, when Nick is going to like maybe get back with his ex and all of that. The more dramatic parts of that, I feel like they don't necessarily do between the two of them. They do them kind of with other people, and then it allows that like dramatic moment to sort of swell and then disappear because they're not main cast.
Yeah.
So then this is the end of season 6, I think, or towards the end of season 6.
Yeah.
Well, so then season 7, it's 3 years later. This is the last episode of season 6, and it ends with them getting together. The very first episode of season 7 is 3 years later.
Yeah, which a lot of shows like to do at this time. Parks and Rec did this.
Yeah, and when I think about it, I'm like, it's nice because it is a different move than like the long drawn out, like, what do you do from right here, from this moment. I kind of like what they did with the way that they said, okay, let's go 3 years into the future. They've been together all this time. She's given up her job. They've traveled around on his book tour because his book became like world famous or, nationally famous. And he's been doing all of this stuff as an author. And now let's kind of tell the story of what happens right in like so we don't have all the kind of boredom that's off camera in Pam and Jim's relationship once they're together and happy, right? We never get to, there's nothing to see. There's no more drama.
But I think the only reason why they really have to do such a drastic time jump is because everyone's hip now to the kid is 4 years old now trope, right? They don't want to do that. They want to have Cece and Schmidt's kid be a little older, I think. Because everything you're saying, I agree with, but you could buy that it being a year later or something, his book has taken off. I feel like, and I'm just basing this on my own mystery solving, that it is just that they want to have they want to age up the kid. And at this point, Cece and Schmidt are really just as much at the heart of the show as Nick and Jess are.
Yes.
And I feel like that's the only reason why you have to make it a matter of years instead of just like a year.
That's interesting. Okay, so what we haven't mentioned is that also in this episode, Cece and Schmidt find out that they're pregnant, right? And so that's like another big reveal, another piece of this like huge season finale. It's a reason to skip ahead in time, not just for the kid, but so you have stories to tell, right? Otherwise, it does feel like that whiplash drama of we just got together. Now we're going to break up 2 weeks later. What is even the fight going to be about? Like, this is so dumb. And it makes them seem more toxic than you really want them to be, right?
Yeah. And so the final season episode where they get engaged is called Mario, right? Because it's all about Jess wants to adopt a dog called Mario. Season 7, episode 6. And this is it's the kind of thing that, you know, despite everything that we say about how the shows keep evolving and the 21st century shows are different, it reminds you that it's still a sitcom and it hasn't forgotten that it's a sitcom, right? Because I feel like this story, Nick wants to propose to Jess at the restaurant where they had their first date, but everything keeps getting wrong and they're working at cross purposes because they're working on sitcom communication rules where they don't tell each other anything. You know, Nick wants it to be a surprise. He's got Rob Reiner as Jess's dad calling him on the phone saying, you know, my blessing's going to expire at midnight if you don't
got to get it done.
Don't propose. Right. And so it's got some of that farcical silliness and that very sort of like high concept, like what's the episode about? Nick trying to propose to Jess, but he can't quite do it because everything's going wrong. You know, it's got that simplicity that makes it sitcom-y in a fun way that reminds you like, this isn't, you know, masterpiece theater.
Yes. And like I said, I really appreciate what they did. Look, this last season isn't even a full season. It's 8 episodes. It was like a mid-season replacement. It started in April, ended in May. And the season 6 ended in April 2017. And season 7 debuted April 2018. So it was a full year later. They didn't have like a normal season. I guess, you know, I'm sure they were in danger of being canceled or whatever, but they wanted to give some type of closure, or they got this, you know, 8 episode arc that they could do. So it was a smart move to do the 3 years later and then do like what you said, kind of lean in each episode into the joy of the characters, of who they were, a lot of fun with like the navel gazing in terms of, yes, we are a sitcom and we're going to do some things that are kind of straightforward, farcical fun, because these are the stories that we would have told had we had another 3 seasons, but we're going to condense it all into one. And thank goodness. Yeah, definitely by having the shortened season, you get the all filler, no killer kind of situation. We're not just, biding time. And the season finale with the final true American game is great. We can save all that for another time. Great season finales. So Nick and Jess writ large, I guess it's like what New Girl is doing in general. Like, it's going back to Friends in terms of like, let's just have a fun show about a group of friends. Yeah. Right. No Only
big deal.
In LA, not in New York.
And we'll have some of them, we'll form relationships with each other. We'll bring in some outside people, whatever, you know, just keep it simple. It's not going to sort of challenge the form the way The Office, especially the British Office, did. And yet you see in the smaller ways, like we keep saying, it's just so much more organic and modern and less tropey. You know, it's not like he's the neat one and he's the funny one and he's the stupid one. You know, we didn't mention it, but in these later episodes of Friends, Joey is full on like he needs somebody to tie his shoes, you know, like it's so cartoonish the way I really noticed like every single thing he says is a I'm dumb joke. And New Girl has none of that. The characters are very silly.
Got smarter.
They're all so good, but again, it's less tropey, it's less trite, it's less formulaic. And so, like you just buy into it just much more easily, I think, than, you know, certainly than the 20th century ones.
Yeah. I mean, I'll say this, though. I totally understand the like, let's wrap up these will they, won't they's within the first 5 seasons because I'm exhausted. I remember when we watched New Girl end to end, I was tired. I was so glad that we had a break from Nick and Jess of it all for a while. Like, it's nice when Schmidt and Cece became the center drama romance because you just get so tired of the same characters and the same stories over and over and over and over and over again. And I think about that, and then I think about, you know, in the Cheers days when there were 26 to 30 episodes in a season, and how so many of them just had the single plot point, you know, of the Sam and Diane thing. Like, how exhausting would that be to just watch that same show over and over and over again? Although it's great. Like, and I love going back and watching them, but I do get the fatigue, and I'm glad that all of these shows have sort of, you know, picked up where the other one left off.
Yeah.
In terms of, you really see it now that we've watched them kind of all the way through, or at least this one storyline all the way through. You can really see how each time they were trying to like learn the lessons from the past. The Sam and Diane, it was such a one note toxic thing. And so then Ross and Rachel, their thing was that they were friends, and they were friends first. And that was like, how do we exist in this world where it isn't just all about our crazy sexual tension? It's that we're, you know, your sister is my best friend. We're always going to be in each other's lives. And then you have The Office, who, like you said, did something totally different and said, okay, we're not even going to look at them as friends at all. It's just, it's none of their real life is on camera. It's all just work life. So it's all like you're acting in a sort of semi-professional way, right? And then New Girl says, oh no, we can do it in a friend way. Like, we can be back into these characters being involved in way too many aspects of each other's lives, but it doesn't have to get laborious.
Yeah, I think that's really well said, the way that they're all sort of in conversation with each other, and they sort of pick up the mantle of, like, you know, whether they knew that they were going to be sort of the defining sitcoms of the decades or not. Like, they kind of take it upon themselves to, absorb everything that's come before them and sort of tread new territory. I think that, with Cheers, it really is... the comparison I would go back to again is it's like comic strips. You know, it's like saying, okay, you know, Garfield hated Mondays last week. He's going to hate Mondays again this week.
And he might love lasagna this week.
Exactly. Or, you know, Coyote dropped a piano on Roadrunner last week. This time he's going to drop an anvil on him or something.
Right.
Like, it's just...
And the Roadrunner? Always going to get away.
Yeah, like, you just go for these little bite-sized entertainments, and the sort of repetitiveness of it is part of the whole deal. You know, like, you tune into Cheers every Thursday night because you want to see that comfortable, familiar dynamic. And sure, you want to see them push the story along, but little by little, no one's in any rush, because... what is this if not just an opportunity to see Ted Danson and Shelley Long do their rat-a-tat and see the other characters do those things? And nobody's looking for anything more than, let's see these funny, lovable characters go through these beats.
Right. And they're also not watching them in back-to-back
exactly.
episodes.
And they're not designed to be.
Right.
Yeah, and neither is Friends, but you see it taking us to that next step where you see... just in general, the look of sitcoms starting to change, the way that Friends is so colorful. You know, it's funny in that last episode when Joey goes, has it always been purple in here? You know, now that there's nothing on the walls, he's noticing it's purple. The Friends apartment being purple is a big part of, I think, like, what defined the look of sitcoms to come. Of like, oh, wait, it doesn't have to be beige. Like, oh, it's not gonna distract from our characters if the walls are any color except white or beige. And so, in all of those 21st century shows, you get those nice, bold colors.
Yeah.
And it just makes them feel so much more sort of warm and cozy than, you know, the different strokes and Charles in Charge sets where everything's tan. But that's just a side note. That's one innovation. The real innovation is, pulling from, like, okay, maybe we'll keep some aspects of the comic strip thing, but let's pull a little bit from soap operas. Let's have a little bit of that energy, but we're going to keep it kind of like a classy, sort of mainstream soap opera-ish. We're not going to have, you know, the Drake Ramore kind of stuff where I get married to your identical cousin and then he drives off a cliff or something. But you see them pulling from those other sort of storytelling aspects. And then, yeah, just like everything else in the 90s, sort of blowing its wad and kind of reaching for the stars a little bit too much. And then so the 21st century brings the deconstruction, you know,
right.
brings the office and everything. Let's take things back to basic. Let's turn it into a satire or some sort of meta commentary on itself. And then again, New Girl being like, okay, let's take a chill pill from that and just like, let's go back to basics. Let's learn all the lessons that we've learned in terms of crafting funny, smart comedy, because Friends was great at that and The Office was great at that. And so, yeah, let's build on all that in terms of the funny jokes and all the recurring gags and the zany characters and all those things. But we don't need to like shoot for the stars in these other ways.
Sure.
You know,
the basis of the relationship between Nick and Jess, like Jim and Pam, is this sort of friendship.
Yeah.
Right? Where that's what they would say about Friends, about Ross and Rachel. But truthfully, it was just Monica. That was like the reason they had to keep being around each other and deal with each other. Whereas with a Jim and Pam and a Nick and Jess, no, they're actually friends and they would choose to be around each other no matter what. And that's the thing that makes them make decisions. Like Jess saying, I have to leave and move out of my apartment because I do need to have some space to get over him. I'm never going to get over him. And Jim doing the same thing. Like, I can't stay here. I've got to take a job in Stamford because I can't be around Pam every day. It's becoming too painful. And, you know, yes, there's many other opportunities in life. And that's, by the way, a decision that normal human people make, not just in sitcom land. Like, you know what? I need a little space from this, or I'm not in a great place. I want to try and live somewhere else, or take a different job, or do something different. Yeah.
And it's funny how we get that geographical element in almost all of these. You know, even the New Girl one, like you said, has Jess relocating to Portland for a while. That's always kind of part of it. In terms of like, I don't know, like ranking or comparing, I mean, I feel like the first two, the 20th century ones, to me, like they have to function as icons, you know, like they function as the great characters of all time, you know, just the way you might talk about like Scarlett O'Hara or something. Like they're just these larger than life fixtures of entertainment that are amazing. But yeah, like we've spent this whole time talking about, they just totally fall apart, you know, if you're trying to think of them as like real people. So I still sort of love them, but it's for that. It's because it's Friends. It's Ross and Rachel. Like it changed the face of sitcoms. It's Sam and Diane. Like you just, you know, like they absolutely have the goods in terms of like the sitcoms being that high quality that you understand like, oh, I get why everyone watched this and loved it. Even if I think these relationships are, you know, like insane or just like not realistic. I wouldn't say you've got to see this to have a good marriage. I'd say you've got to see this to see how sitcoms
sitcoms evolve.
And then, yeah, Jim and Pam and Nick and Jess, like, again, I feel like it's a matter of preference in terms of which kind of show you like, just kind of like I was saying about the double date, like they're just sort of different personalities.
Yeah.
For me, like, to be honest, in terms of just my personal sort of pleasure, they just kind of keep getting better, you know, because like New Girl, the sensibility of it, as much as I love The Office, like in terms of just sheer laughs, like those characters are all so funny and the writing is so funny that if it just comes down to like Desert Island, like which DVD box set do I get to choose, I would pick New Girl.
Oh, I'm 100% on board with you. And I think what we kind of noticed the more we got into Cheers, whereas at the beginning when we were first starting to watch Cheers in the kind of early episodes, we were definitely seeing more of the ensemble comedy, just like we mentioned with Friends. Throughout, there were always the multiple storylines and lots of things going on. What happened with Cheers, though, is as the episodes got more serious, they got more kind of single focus. Yeah. So the episodes that were about Sam and Diane and had these big swings, we didn't get a lot of B-plot. There was not a lot. There was a joke here or there, just enough to like break up the drama. But we really weren't getting to see the other characters and all the ensemble glory that Cheers is known for. And so I wonder how much of that was kind of like true throughout those kind of seasons 3, 4, 5, when it was really heavy with Sam and Diane. And then how much that changed with the arrival of Kirstie Alley and the whole new idea that Sam didn't own the bar anymore. And it was just a completely different thing starting in season 6. So I'd love to go and watch some more Cheers just to get more familiar with the ensemble, because I remember the Kirstie Alley days. That's when I was watching it. And to me, there was always stuff going on with everybody.
Yeah. Well, I think it's like we were saying, because it was more serialized in general at that time. And it's like, sure, we could have a 2-episode arc and, like we can have certain things be ongoing, but it's just not like TV was even in the 90s and definitely now, where, like I said before, you could have all these different plates spinning. I feel like in those shows, it's like, we've got 22 minutes. And if there's a lot of Sam and Diane drama, they just weren't going to trickle it out over 5 episodes and also have,
all these other
Cliff
things.
Wants to adopt a kid.
All these other things going on. Overall rankings, look, I am of the hardcore belief that if you are not a person who watched New Girl, because it is the most recent of these shows, it definitely was on during the era where people had Netflix and were watching streaming and, had DVRs and stuff and maybe didn't watch all the sitcoms anymore. It had a crappy marketing campaign, as we've talked about to begin with. And I think some people just didn't watch that show. Watch New Girl. It's great.
Yeah, no, it really holds up. I think if anything, it's more liked now that it's sort of like people have calmed down a little. I feel like Zooey Deschanel kind of ruffled some feathers in her day, just being too like quirky for some people's taste.
Well, I don't know about that, but I mean, just like you said, the cast in that show is stellar. Everyone is hitting on all cylinders. Same can be said about Cheers, but we just don't get to see as much of them in some of these more Sam and Diane episodes.
Yeah. All right. Well, that pretty much concludes our epic analysis. It was interesting, it definitely, I wouldn't say that there's any shocking revelations exactly, but, everything we've been saying about the way that the shows evolved, the way that the relationships are sort of characterized, changes over time. I feel like I kind of get that more clearly now.
Yeah, I think that if we were to look at some others, if we were to think about some other will they, won't they's, we've mentioned them before on the podcast, but the Ted Robin from How I Met Your Mother is really interesting. They kind of fall sort of around the same timeline as The Office. And I think they're that's an interesting look at that, right? Because controversial, because they spent the whole series building up to who's the mother, and then we meet the mother and then she's got cancer, and so then she's gonna leave us. And so that one is I don't know, I found one of the reasons we didn't pick that as one of the ones that we were gonna analyze here is that I think a lot of people, including me, I was a big fan of that show back in the day. That's a bummer to me. I don't think Ted needed to end up with Robin.
Yeah, the whole last season of that show was frustrating. Yeah, there's, sort of going to the other side of things. There's Zach and Kelly, of course, that, are will they, won't they?
Not a real romance.
Well, for some of us it was.
Oh my gosh.
They got married in Vegas, it happened. But yeah, there's many will they, won't they couples out there, but definitely the iconic nature, there is a drop off, after these ones, even between, Ross and Rachel and Jim and Pam and Nick and Jess, there's sort of a chasm of cultural cachet. But nonetheless. Okay. So much for our 5-part will they, won't they romance. What are we talking about next week?
Next week, we're going on strike, but you can still hear our podcast. We're going to watch Benson, Season 1, Episode 13, One Strike, You're Out. Murphy Brown, Season 3, Episode 4, Strike 2. Hanging with Mr. Cooper, Season 1, Episode 14, How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying. And Workaholics, Season 1, Episode 6, The Strike.
Yep, we will be crossing the picket line next week, and until then, we will
I'm not a scab.
We will consider this segment of the sitcom study concluded. Thank you for listening to the Sitcom Study. Tell us what you think or share your own TV tropes and topic ideas by sending a self-addressed stamped email to sitcomstudypodcast@gmail.com or find us on Facebook or Instagram. And if you like the show, consider leaving a rating or review on your podcast app. It helps us boost those precious Nielsen ratings. The Sitcom Study is recorded in front of a live studio dog.